Tonight we're in Thetford. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Nicky Morgan, former Treasury Minister and Secretary of State for Education under David Cameron, now a prominent Tory backbencher. Anneliese Dodds, Labour's Shadow Treasury Minister and a former MEP. Business and Industry spokesperson for the SNP at Westminster, Hendry. Alison Phillips, columnist and editor of the Daily Mirror. And journalist, author, co-host of ITV's Good Morning Britain and a chum of Donald Trump, Piers Morgan. Welcome to our panel here, to our audience, and of course to you at home. You can argue along in the usual fashion. You know how to do it, using hashtag BBCQT on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. Join in the conversation. Right, let's have our first question tonight, which is from Kyle Bradshaw.
Should the leader of the opposition be protesting against the President of the United States?
Of course, Jeremy Corbyn was at a protest while Donald Trump was here. Nicky Morgan.
No, I don't think he should be, because actually, whatever we might think about Donald Trump, per se, actually he is the President of the United States, and one would assume that the leader of the opposition, I shall do all I can to stop him becoming Prime Minister, but presumably he wants to become Prime Minister, and as Prime Minister representing this country, he would need to have a relationship with one of our most important allies and the leader of one of our most important relationships around the world. This week he has shown that actually he's not wanting to do that, take on that responsibility. But
he did try to have a meeting with Donald Trump, but
he tried
Donald Trump didn't appear to want to.
He was invited to the state banquet. He was invited, I think, to opportunities to meet him, and instead he chose to be out whipping up people into protest. Of course, there is a place for protest, there's a place for free speech, but no. The leader of the opposition, if he's serious about wanting to get into government, and he's shown this week that he is not serious about wanting to be in government, he is about protest.
Anneliese?
I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that I don't agree with that. I don't think it was right, actually, that particularly during this week, we should have a state visit for somebody like President Trump. And it was a state visit. It would have been perfectly possible for him to come, quite rightly, to participate in those very, very important commemorations that we have on this week in an official capacity, as indeed did other leaders. But instead, the government decided to give him that state visit.
But you know the argument that's come up time and time again about this, which is why Jeremy Corbyn thought it was OK to go to attend a state visit for Xi Jinping of China, who's been massively criticised for human rights violations, mass detention of the Uyghur people. Why is that OK? But it's not OK to meet Donald Trump?
Because these are very different circumstances, because with the US, quite rightly, we've got a special relationship. That special relationship is based on democratic values, which sadly President Trump is not heeding. And even before he came into our country, he was criticising British institutions, some of which are not able to answer back. He was criticising members of our royal family. He was criticising the Mayor of London.
Well, he denies that he was.
And
was it a bit embarrassing when it came out about this meeting that Jeremy Corbyn had requested with Trump?
I don't think
because he was protesting.
No,
he'd requested a meeting, but that only became apparent when Donald Trump mentioned it. Was that not?
No, quite the opposite. The whole point of requesting that meeting is because we need to have a robust dialogue with President Trump. But according him, all that pomp and splendour of a state visit was completely inappropriate. And that was why Jeremy said, let's have a meeting, let's have that robust dialogue, but we should not be giving him that legitimacy through a state visit. And, this is not about the UK's relationship with the US. That's not what it's about. It's about whether it's right to honour President Trump in this way as an individual. And I'm afraid that's what we did this week. And that was the wrong decision. It should not have happened.
Piers.
Well, the truth about Jeremy Corbyn is, had it been a Hamas terrorist or an IRA terrorist or somebody like that, sorry.
You're getting mass groans from the audience,
fine,
Piers. I have to point that out.
You may not want to hear the truth, but it's the truth. Had had it been somebody of that ilk, Jeremy Corbyn would have been around there making them cups of tea. Just as he rolled up to the Buckingham Palace for the state banquet for President Xi of China, which, I mean, has a far worse human rights record than America. The point about it wasn't a personal visit. Donald Trump was invited on a state visit by the Queen, by Her Majesty the Queen, because it's the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And it was a chance to bring together these two great countries, which 75 years ago fought for our freedom and democracy. That's why Donald Trump was here. And, you know, we have to work out who our friends are in this world right now. It's a tough world. It's a rough world. And Donald Trump is the president of our #1 ally. And as we leave the European Union, which we have to do, and I'm sure we'll come to this, as we leave the European Union, never has that relationship been more important. And the spectacle, frankly, of the Labour Mayor of London spending 2 days before Trump even got here howling abuse about him in print and on the airwaves, and then the leader of the Labour Party, having been turned down for his meeting, then marching around, leading the protests, shouting and screaming. What kind of message does that send in the week of D-Day to the President of the United States, and more importantly, to the people he represents back in America, the American people who, when we needed them 75 years ago, they were there for us.
Okay.
And I think you can protest, but I'm also entitled to say that protest was unedifying and embarrassing to this country.
Let's hear from the audience. The man in the check shirt.
Her Majesty the Queen is regarded across the world as one of the best leaders there is. She is neutral and she has a great deal of diplomacy. What part of that does Jeremy Corbyn fill on a world stage?
Let's hear the man here. I'll come back to you, Anneliese.
Piers made a point. We're just trying to leave the European Union, and never more than now. We're trying to be an outward-facing country. We've got to engage with countries all over the world outside of Europe, and then you have this kind of protest going on with one of the biggest countries in the world that we need to trade with, we need to engage with. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Woman at the back there.
Can I just say that that wasn't a proper demonstration? That was a disgusting spectacle of an effigy of Donald Trump, a US president, democratically elected. It wasn't a coup, he was democratically elected, sitting on a toilet in the middle of central London. That was disgusting. Sadiq Khan should be spending more time trying to control the knife epidemic going on in London instead of protesting against Donald Trump.
Can I see, is there anyone in the audience who supports Jeremy Corbyn's decision to protest? Yes, the man here in the jacket, in the striped shirt.
I think protest is all well and good. I think it's part of the democracy in which we live. But I think Jeremy Corbyn should have met Trump and he should have protested face to face with the man rather than on the street. That would have made him a much more credible leader of the opposition, which we are sadly lacking at the moment.
The man in the white shirt at the back.
Piers Morgan talks brought up about D-Day there, and I've seen a lot on social media about people saying it's disrespectful to the memory of those who fought on D-Day to protest in that manner. What I would say is actually more disrespectful to the memories of the people who fought on D-Day is to not protest and simply wave out a red carpet for a racist a misogynist, who is allowing children to die in immigrant camps on his watch. You know, you talk about human rights. Where's the human rights for those who are dying in the immigrant camps he's setting up?
When you say they're dying, you're talking about children being separated from their parents. I think that's what you're talking about. Drew, Ian Blackford was also protesting, wasn't he?
Well, it is really important to engage with people when you don't agree with them. But let's face it, a state visit, which would have been requested by the Prime Minister through the Queen, a state visit is an honour, not a requirement for that engagement. And we obviously must, make sure that we're working with our allies and working with people to get that engagement, building on a strong relationship we've had with America.
But do you think that was right to be protesting?
But that relationship lasts long after Donald Trump has left office. That has been something that's endured for a long time and will endure. And it's really important to tell people when they've got things wrong face to face. I agree with the comment that was made earlier. So, yes, you should protest when it's appropriate. You should also engage when it's appropriate.
Did the SNP request a meeting with Trump?
Well, I don't know if we've actually requested a meeting, but I'm sure that we would have been willing to take one with him in order to point out that the policies that he's put forward in terms of being a climate change denier, in terms of saying that he's going to put the Iran nuclear deal in jeopardy by withdrawing from that he may come out of NATO are not helpful to our security or indeed to the benefit of people. And it's very clear that in Scotland, his values are not those values of the people of Scotland. It's very, very clear that people don't react that way. And for somebody who has separated parents from their children, and those children have actually been put in cages, it is important not to roll out the red carpet and enable that kind of behaviour. You can engage, but we shouldn't be enabling it.
We did roll out the red carpet for Barack Obama, and he deported 3 million illegal immigrants. He was known as the deporter-in-chief. Okay. And we also rolled it out for Tony Blair rolled it out for George W. Bush 6 months after the illegal Iraq war. So, Labour...
OK, but Piers, I want to hear from the rest of the
It doesn't make it right, but it does mean there's a double standard about Trump, which I find a little bit irritating, frankly.
I think the thing with Donald Trump, as the gentleman there said, there are clearly a lot of things about him that don't sit well with British values. I mean, we know he's been racist. We know he's separated children from their parents. We know that some of the ways that he's treated women have been appalling. But when you're in a high position in politics, you don't have to like everybody that you deal with. And I think if you look at the way the Queen tackled this issue this week, she was pitch perfect in that she had this bully, I mean, Piers may not agree, this sort of braying character who is what he is with Donald Trump. And she, in the state banquet, when she said about the importance of the institutions that have kept us security and stability since the Second World War, you hope that he listened to those words, and you hope that in this week of all weeks, indeed, he sees the value of alliances, and that is the message you would have liked Jeremy Corbyn to have taken to him face to face, rather than down a microphone at a rally.
Hold it at the back.
I very much agree with your point, but I would question if we should be honouring a man who wants to negotiate for our NHS as part of his trade deal when he arrived in this country.
I mean, I completely agree on that point, but I think you have to negotiate with people where you may not like what they say, you may not want to agree with them. And I think the very idea that the American pharmaceutical companies or American businesses have got their sights set on our NHS is absolutely abhorrent, and it has to be stopped at all costs. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't speak to people.
Let's have a question from Toby Rideout, which is exactly on this point.
Yeah. Should we be concerned that Donald Trump is eyeing up the NHS?
Anneliese?
Yes.
Yes, is what you're going to say.
In one word. I mean, I could just finish my answer there, but we...
Well, that would be a novelty.
Thank you. We should be concerned, but I think we should also be concerned that when he said that from a podium, he had the UK Prime Minister next to him, and she didn't contradict him. She didn't say, no, we don't agree with that. She just said, well, in a negotiation, you've got two different parties who negotiate, and kind of flannelled on. She didn't say, that's not what we're going to do in the UK. So it's very, very concerning.
I mean, Eric, some American firms do already supply services to the NHS.
Yes, of course, but they don't do so in the kind of untrammelled way that we've seen in many other countries that have a completely privatised health service. And I think that's the concern that many people have.
Is that your genuine concern, that the NHS would be completely privatised? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, let's be honest, we've already got quite a lot of privatisation. It's proceeding apace, sadly, under the current government. But if we did have the national... Well, the cancer scanning service in the Thames Valley is currently about to be handed over, it appears, to a private provider, even although we've been told that there won't be any more privatisation under the current Secretary of State of Health's watch. But I think there is a real problem when you start to cover services in trade deals, because then legally it's very, very hard for governments to say, no, actually, you can't touch that, because then the company can just say, well, actually, according to this trade deal, yes, we can, and if you don't like it, then we'll take you to an international court and we'll sue you. And that has happened in relation to some other countries' services. So we should not be letting it happen to our NHS.
Now, Piers Morgan, Donald Trump said everything would be on the table in trade deal, including the NHS. When he spoke to you, he said, actually, the NHS wouldn't be on the table. I mean, next time he mentions it, might be back on the table. It's hard to know.
Well, I think something happened between the time that press conference finished and he walked with Theresa May about 50 yards down to the Churchill War Rooms, where I was, waiting to do an interview with him, and they clearly had a conversation. I think it was explained to him, look, this isn't just playing badly with Labour on the left, which he wouldn't care about. It's playing very badly with the Conservatives here, particularly the leaders who are people who are trying to be the new leader of the party. Makes their lives very difficult.
But what should people believe, given he changed his mind in the space of what?
Donald Trump's a business guy, so he wants to do. He considers himself half British. His mum was raised in Scotland until she was 18, and he is a businessman to his core. He's not an ideologue. He's a business guy. He's looking at a great new trade deal. He keeps saying this. He wants it. Remember, Barack Obama, we were back of the queue. Donald Trump, front of the queue. This is great. He believes in Brexit. He believes in this country having a good deal with him.
He's not said we're front of the queue.
Well, actually, he has said that. He has said that. He has said we're front of the queue. He said it to me.
And he literally used those words.
He said it to me in the last interview I did last summer, on Air Force One. He did. He said we were front of the queue for a trade deal. Right? He considers Britain to be one of his most important countries in the world. And on the NHS, something happened in that little walk down where he changed his mind. But when we get in the room with them, he's going to say, OK, let's do a deal. What's on the table? Then it's down to us and our negotiating team. Now, part of the reason we're in this horrendous mess over Brexit is that we've had such terrible negotiators who've dug us into this appalling position we find ourselves. Donald Trump and his team are good negotiators. So when it comes to a trade deal with the Americans, let's put some damn good business people in there and let's do a good deal with them.
Toby, what's your feeling on this?
I would like to say that one of my concerns is that being the country that we are, detaching ourselves from Europe, becoming a minnow in a large pond, a country like the United States, they may want to do business with us, but actually, and Donald Trump is a businessman, but the difference between businessmen and humanists and politicians who are humanists are that they're just looking to get the best deal for them. And I'm very concerned that these deals that will now be happening are going to be stacked towards the giants, like the United States, and we would find ourselves exploited. Also, I'd like to say that I'm concerned about, I've experienced the American health system, and I really don't want to give up those things to these countries where people check your wallet at the side of the road to see if you've got health insurance before they agree to treat you.
Well,
totally
I mean, but Nicky, I mean, Toby has a point to react in terms of. I mean, Toby, you describe this Britain as a minnow compared to the juggernaut of the United States. And what about Anneliese's point in terms of Theresa May not standing up for the NHS when she was next to Donald Trump?
OK, there are two more things to this. Firstly is the Donald Trump interview with Piers Morgan, where Donald Trump actually managed to get a word in edgeways, which is unlike most of other people who are interviewed by Piers. And it was quite an interesting word.
Low blow for a fellow Morgan. That's really...
Yes, I've watched the Twitter feed about this. I keep hearing Morgan having a go at on the Twitter feed, and I keep thinking, oh, thank goodness it's Piers Morgan they're having a go at, not me for once. So, look, the point about the NHS is that actually, to answer the serious question, this is a negotiation, and many people in this part of the world voted for Brexit. And what Brexit means is there are going to be trade agreements that are going to be done with other countries. But it's a negotiation. And actually what happened between them getting off from the podium and getting into the interview was that actually the Conservative government, particularly led by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, fought back immediately to make clear the NHS is not on the table. So by the time Donald Trump sat down, he had been told in no uncertain terms that under a Conservative government, the NHS is not going to be part of any trade negotiation.
So if Michael Gove were to become Tory leader, to become Prime Minister, are you guaranteeing then he would make no new deals regarding the NHS with the United States?
So this week I have been co-chairing or overseeing a series of hustings with all the Conservative leadership contenders. They were all asked about this and they all said the NHS is not up for sale.
That's
in the
a
trade
different...
negotiations, the rest of
To
it.
be honest, it's not up for sale.
Well,
I'm not even
it's
sure
not in
what
the
that
trade-
means.
it's not-
What I'm asking very specifically
It's not,
is...
but the answer is all the contenders said the NHS is not going to be part of the trade negotiations in relation to the US. And just to answer Anneliese's point, the involvement of private providers in the NHS started under the Labour Party. That it was a Labour Health Secretary that oversaw the move of Hinchinbrook Hospital, not a million miles away from here, to private providers, and there's always been, and that's exactly what the Shadow Health Secretary has admitted.
But
so
Nicky,
the
difference is we've learned from that experience. And we've learned...
Well, you've learned because you're in
that
opposition.
Not,
Yes, that's right.
No, not because we're in opposition. That is not the case, I'm afraid. It's not the case. We've learned that it's not delivered value for money and it hasn't improved patient outcomes and it should have stopped. And quite frankly, if you agree, then I would like to see more Conservative politicians challenging what's happening within the NHS at the moment.
We can have a separate debate about what we mean by private providers. GPs or charities. Are we honestly saying we don't want something like Macmillan Cancer to be involved in the NHS? Because they are technically private providers. But going back to the original thing, well, exactly. So let's have a proper debate about these things.
Yes.
But let's have a proper debate about the NHS not being part of the trade negotiations. The NHS is a very precious thing. There will be other elements of trade negotiations. It's going to be it's a negotiation that is going to take a long time. These negotiations are, that's why I'm very sceptical about Brexit, but I am backing Michael Gove for the leadership because actually somebody who wanted Brexit should be the person, the Prime Minister chair, to deliver it. Woman in the front.
Backtracking slightly, upon Anneliese's point of Theresa May should have spoken up when Donald Trump mentioned about the NHS. But you just said it was wrong of Jeremy Corbyn to stand in front of thousands of people in London and protest what Donald Trump done. So why is it wrong of Theresa May to stand by and say
Anneliese
nothing?
wasn't saying that Jeremy Corbyn was wrong to protest, not at all.
Did you not say?
No,
that
she was
it the wrong
supporting.
thing to do?
She was definitely supporting her leader. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think he was right to do that. He was right. And he was right to seek a meeting with him as well, which was sadly turned down. Yeah.
The woman there in the corner.
I'm a nurse in the NHS. I'm a community nurse. We already have a dreadful recruitment problem. Let's not make it any worse by involving Trump.
Yeah.
Alison.
I think it's really quite a simple thing, really. I mean, there's something like, I think the NHS spends something like £120 billion a year, 18 billion of that's on pharmaceuticals. There is no doubt the Americans are going to want to get their mitts on some of that money. As you say, Piers, Trump is a businessman. He can see a deal. He is not going to be put off. And do not ever forget that when he says his bid is to make America great again, his aim is not to have free healthcare at the point of service for pensioners in this country or for children or for cancer patients. It is about what's right for America. And I completely take your point that everyone was falling over themselves amongst the leadership hopefuls the other day to say, oh, we wouldn't consider the NHS isn't on the table. I tell you what, if we're in a situation, and in particular a no-deal situation, somebody like Boris Johnson, he'd be selling his granny as well as the NHS.
Yeah.
So,
Woman there.
I think what we're really worried about is that we've had years of really rubbish negotiation.
Yes.
And we don't want to we've lost faith in our government, and we're going to then see this negotiation fall through with Trump. And we don't want that. We want someone strong that's going to be able to negotiate properly with him.
Completely. This is the fundamental
But we
point.
haven't got that.
He's going to have a bunch of killers in that room. The best Goldman Sachs traders you've ever seen and so on, right? We need our own killers. The ones we didn't have in the room with the EU.
Drew, on the original question about Donald Trump and the NHS.
First of all, I think Nicky's really brave making promises that this Tory government can deliver anything at the moment. I don't think that's a real possibility at all. But Donald Trump is not the only person to say that the NHS is up for grabs. The American ambassador said that the NHS is up for grabs as well. And if anybody thinks that you can trust Donald Trump in a negotiation, his whole style is about winning the best deal for him, not for the partner. This isn't a partnership or a negotiation.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, because
why shouldn't he be putting America
NHS,
first?
especially in Scotland, is far too precious to be left at the hands of somebody like Trump and traded away just allowed...
Well, hang on, the NHS of Scotland. The NHS of Scotland under your tenure, the SNP, has not exactly been dancing off the rooftops, hasn't
the
it?
NHS in Scotland
waiting
is the
lists
best
have not.
performance.
Waiting lists.
The
Okay.
The NHS in Scotland is the best performing NHS in the UK. It has the shortest. It has the best performance in accident and emergency. We have more doctors per head of GPs per head of population than anywhere else in the UK.
You don't have failing waiting times. You don't have the worst record of youth mental health waiting times.
The NHS.
You don't have bed blocking crises.
Piers,
you don't have recruitment crises.
Well,
I'm putting things to you to point out that your own tenure of running the NHS, actually, it may be better than down here. That's no great boast.
And Piers, you have to let him answer as well.
Yeah, Piers would say, notwithstanding that there are always issues in an NHS which is under pressure, Piers would say, as simply selling off the NHS to the best private bid he could get through Trump.
When did I say that?
Because that's what you've just said.
I don't. I believe in the NHS and we should protect it. I don't believe that.
Okay. This is in danger of turning into question time between you two. Okay. Riveting though that is, that's not particularly how I want this programme to go. We're going to move on, but before we do, I just wanted to say that question time comes from Brecon next week, and the following week we will be in Tottenham in North London. So go all... I'll get that right in a minute. Call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience. And go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. The details are up here. Right, let's move on from Trump. Just for a moment. Philip Waring.
Yes. Can I be right that 150,000 pensioners get to decide the next Prime Minister?
Yes.
Well, obviously we're talking about toilet leadership. I think, in fairness, the average age, as far as I'm able to ascertain, of the Conservative membership is something like 57. But when you're 55, that doesn't look that old, I have to say. Piers, go on, let's let you have a go at this.
Well, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? We don't know who these people are, but I would say the same thing applies to the Labour Party. One of the reasons the Labour Party can't get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, when so many of their own MPs want to, is because of the membership structure they set up just a few years ago.
Yeah, but can you answer the question, which is about the Conservative leadership?
I think it applies to both parties, is my point. But in relation to this, I think we should know who these people are, because they're going to have an enormous amount of sway over the fundamental decision. This leadership contest will be fought and won on one issue, Brexit. That's it. Nothing else is happening in this country right now. We can talk about the NHS, all these things. Nothing else is being discussed other than Brexit. And until that gets resolved, we're paralysed. So this leadership contest comes down to who's got the best Brexit plan. And the people that will ultimately decide who the leader will be making this critical decision, which 30-odd million people in this country voted over, it's 100-odd thousand people. We don't know who these people are. So, yes, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it should be perhaps public knowledge, who these people are, who the members are, and we can see whether there's any corruption. We can see whether there's any people that shouldn't be on that list. But at the moment, we're blind.
OK. I mean, Nicky, just coming to the point, I mean, how can the next Conservative leader have a mandate? They're elected by 0.2% of the population, heading a minority government. Surely there has to be a general election.
No, I don't think there absolutely should not be a general election, because what the country wants is Brexit to be delivered, and that's what the candidates are standing on. And so, to answer your question, the Conservative Party does not consist solely of pensioners. I am most definitely not a pensioner.
But it's not just that; it's the numbers. That's well,
no, of course, and it's the numbers and everything else. But the point is, in this country, we vote for a party, and we vote for that person, the person who is leader of that party becomes Prime Minister. So if that leader changes, as we saw with Tony Blair to Gordon Brown or Margaret Thatcher to John Major, then actually it's still the party that is in government. And the issue is, if the party retains the confidence, able to win a vote of confidence in the House of Commons, then it will carry on in government.
So if Labour were in a situation where they had one unelected Prime Minister and then another unelected Prime Minister, would you be sitting there saying, yes, that's fine?
Well, don't forget, Theresa May did, of course, go rather unhappily to the country in 2017 and come back being leader of the largest party, but obviously we didn't get a majority in the House of Commons. So she has been tested. We do have a general election coming in 2022, but we are facing a national crisis at the moment. I would disagree with Piers in the sense of to say nothing else is happening is not correct, but clearly Brexit is the largest issue and it is dominating Parliament, it's dominating public discussion. I asked you earlier on whether we had a question time in the last 6 months whether Brexit hadn't come up. The answer seems to be no from the ones that I have seen. So we've got to get this resolved, and the country wants this to be resolved before we have a general election. That's critical. Drew.
Well, this is a failed zombie government, and the leadership race that's within it at the moment is really a fight between who can deliver the hardest Brexit. Some have said they've got some ideas about doing fantasy renegotiations with the European Union. That's not going to happen. It's basically taking us up to a cliff edge. They should have been using this time, instead of going through this more internal fighting, which has been the same process for 3 years now throughout Brexit. They should have been going through this process to try and sort things out and listen to people. They failed to engage. They failed to listen to the 62% of people in Scotland who voted Remain. They failed to listen to the Scottish Government when they tried to put forward a compromise agreement if Brexit was going to be put ahead. They failed to listen to the Scottish Parliament, every single party except the Tories, and they failed to listen to our MPs in Parliament. And now they're going through this charade of putting a leadership contest together, which is going to just deliver somebody who's ultimately just going to follow in the footsteps of the incumbent Prime Minister at the moment.
The man in the white shirt.
Many people claim the EU is undemocratic, yet 0.2% of the population will be deciding the future Brexit deal that we get with the EU. Surely that's a contradiction.
Take back control. That was the slogan. Yes, the man at the back there.
Yeah, I'm not bothered about how they pick somebody, just as long as the person at the pick is willing to leave on WTO terms.
Right. OK. Man there in the glasses.
Well, our country's a democratic country. We're remembering all the people that obviously fought for us in D-Day and remembering that. So why are we letting another Prime Minister come in from a Prime Minister that was unelected already when the country's clearly lost confidence in the party themselves?
Woman here in the corner.
What my question is United Kingdom is when Wales, Ireland, well, Northern Ireland, Scotland and England unite on a decision. So when we voted and out EU won, to me that meant that was the final decision. Why isn't there anybody in the Parliament got enough sense to make that decision?
Well, we have been trying. I mean, we have been trying to pass the withdrawal agreement.
But what is Michael Gove suggesting? I mean, he set out his stall today in a bit more detail than he has hitherto. Yep. What's he suggesting that hasn't been tried already? Can you tell me one thing?
Well, I think it's a lot more about working specifically with Ireland. It's also about making sure...
But yes, just on that subject, give me one thing he's suggesting that hasn't been tried already.
Well, he's talking about putting much more work into restoring the Stormont Assembly. One of the things... I mean, there have been many
that's going to be the thing that unlocks it, the whole thing. That's the one thing.
Well, you know, Fiona, that there's not just one thing that's going to unlock it. It'll be a combination of things. And actually, it's been very interesting listening to some of the debates from a couple of years ago, how people have moved. And I think people have moved in Parliament. People have moved further from the shock, whether they were celebrating or very miserable about what happened in June 2016. People have now moved. I've moved. I wanted to remain in the EU. I frankly now just want us to get on with it, get out. I'm afraid I disagree with WTO terms completely, but I do want there to be a deal, because I think this country absolutely needs to move on. And I'm somebody who's got a different view from Michael Gove, but I very much think he is absolutely ready to lead the country. He set out a very clear plan today. Part of it involves Ireland, Stormont Assembly, involving obviously a whole new team of negotiators, going back to the point for the lady here about really tough negotiators, but also thinking about the future relationship as well, but also making sure that we have a full stop, bring the backstop to an end as quickly as possible. And some quite interesting noises tonight from the EU that have been reported by the BBC's chief Europe correspondent.
Anneliese?
Well, to go back to the original question, all the decisions around this should not be being made by a very, very small number of people, by just around 100,000 of them. And actually, what we see occurring at the moment is a kind of bidding up between all the different candidates about whether they would countenance a very extreme Brexit. And I'm afraid I don't agree with the gentleman. Obviously, everyone's got different views on this. But if you look at what the impact of leaving without a deal would be on jobs. I mean, I'm very concerned about this because I live very near to a car plant which has said very explicitly what the impact of that would be on complicated supply chains. I think it's a responsibility actually, of all of us to think about people's jobs and the impact of decisions on people. And yet you've got some Conservative leadership candidates who are even saying, well, you know, maybe we could think about not having Parliament sit at all until we get to the leaving date.
Hang on, wait, that was interesting. So you're talking about Dominic Raab, and you just said, hang on, he's mad.
No, I said it's... No, I didn't say... I said it's mad.
Oh,
and clearly, proroguing Parliament... I'm sorry to interrupt, Anneliese, but proroguing Parliament is clearly a mad suggestion. You cannot say you're going to take back control to Parliament, have Parliament sovereignty, and then go, oh, by the way, we're just going to shut Parliament down for a couple of months, so we're just going to drift out on a no.
Out of interest, what do you do in 3/4 of our Parliament have for 3 years steadfast, and I voted Remain, have for 3 years steadfastly refused to enact the result of that referendum?
Well, let's let Anneliese answer that, because we interrupted you.
I'm really curious what the MPs have to say about that.
Yeah, maybe I can respond if you give me a second. Thanks for that.
You can have as many seconds as you like.
Brilliant, good, because I can explain to you that actually, for the last many, many months, those of us, including myself, who campaigned to Remain, initially thought, right, there is the result, we need to deliver that result, there has to be compromise, OK? And that's what I looked for from the first time that I came into Parliament. That was what I expected we would get from the governing party and from MPs within it. What we sadly had instead is a small group of MPs within that ERG group, that very right-wing group, and they've said nothing is acceptable to them apart from having an extreme Brexit that they know, and they've seen the evidence. This is people who've seen the briefings.
So what is Labour, out of interest, what is Labour's position?
Well,
because it seems to change every week.
No, it doesn't.
So why don't you clarify for everybody, what is Labour's position?
With respect, Piers, you've seen, surely...
Tell me. I have no idea. Jeremy Corbyn looked me in the eye and said there would never be a second referendum.
Well, I'm very sorry,
Your last
Piers,
manifesto, the last election, promised to deliver Brexit. Nothing you've done since shows anybody in this country that as a party you have any will to deliver Brexit
I'm very sorry,
at all.
Piers. I think you've been living in a bunker, quite frankly, for the last few months.
I think your leader has. Your leader has.
If you've not seen...
When was your leader last on this programme?
Actually, it's called question time.
Yes.
The reason is because there's a lot of people in the audience who want to ask questions, so let's just hear from you there in the front.
I just think it's a bit outrageous, Piers, that you're turning on somebody for changing their mind when you're happy for Donald Trump to change his mind in 30 seconds.
So the original question was, let me drag you back to it, was about, can it be right that 150,000 people decide the next
Well, I think the simple answer to that has got to be no, because that 150,000 people, I think you can be fairly certain a lot of them will have absolutely no idea about the lives of a lot of ordinary people who are trying to make ends meet and who have been sort of suffering with the last 9 years of austerity. They're possibly quite unlikely to be within that 150,000. So where does that leave us? Well, the other difficulty we've got is that we've got some leadership hopefuls who are drifting further and further to the right. They're offering tax cuts. They're cutting the top rate of income tax. It's the same old Tory stuff that you would expect in a bid to please that 150,000. And as Boris Johnson has said, that to not deal with a very hard Brexit that he is prepared, because otherwise the idea of extinction, they will do anything to anyone at any cost to get that job. And that's where we're left, because they're pandering to that 150,000.
It's interesting that no one has mentioned the Brexit Party yet. Of course, there's a by-election going on in Peterborough. We don't yet know the result. We will know later tonight or in the small hours. We wait to see the result of that. I mean, much of the Tory vote, of course, going to the Brexit Party, as we saw in the EU election.
Yes, sadly that is the case, and I think the way to stop that is to deliver Brexit. And so that's why we've got to get on with it. Look, I'm on the more liberal side of the Conservative Party. I think the answer is not just to go chasing off after Brexit Party votes. It's got to be to appeal to the people who voted Conservative in 2010 and 2015, often from the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, and that's the way we build a strong coalition to make sure that we are returned. And obviously, I must just pick up Alison. I mean, I think please don't make assumptions about all Conservative Party members and their backgrounds and everything else. I mean, like any organisation, there's going to be a wide variety of different experiences. But people actually, I don't think you can be a councillor or even knock on doors, which is what most of us spend our times doing, without actually getting a very good sense and conversations and understanding. And as a constituency member of Parliament, you know, absolutely, I get to see, in fact, the people who ask for my help more and more are the people who very much need it, who, you know, for reasons of benefit claims or housing or anything else it might be. So, you know, we do have an understanding. Please don't make assumptions.
But that perception is there, that is those people. I mean, I don't know if many Conservative Party members are here tonight. Any? Oh, right.
Woo!
and how...
Look, young.
It's not.
He's young, not a pensioner.
Well, let's hear from you then.
What I wanted to say was, Nicky, I hate to offend you, but the reason why a lot of the Conservative voters have gone to the Brexit Party is you're supporting a man like Gove who stated he wants to push Brexit even further back. It was an insult to the British people that we didn't leave on the 31st of March. Why should I vote for you? Like, I'm a member, but I'm certainly not going to be putting my vote towards Gove. It's going to be towards Boris Johnson.
It's going towards Boris Johnson?
Absolutely. Look, the crowd can feel what they want. I'm passionate to leave to leave the EU, on the 31st of October.
Well, can I answer that?
Yeah.
So
I think you better had.
Look, it's obviously a very good challenge, and actually, Michael very much wants to leave on the 31st of October. If we could leave earlier, that'd be fantastic. But the point is, actually, if we are nearly there with a deal,
I mean, he called that date arbitrary, didn't he?
Well,
31st of October.
It is. It's a date that the EU Council came up with. If you remember, they couldn't quite agree. Some wanted to go a year extension to March 2020. Others wanted to do less, so they came up with that October date as being in the middle. And I'd honestly say, as a fellow Conservative, one of the things has been actually about the fact that people respect the Conservatives, the way that we run the economy. A no-deal Brexit will absolutely... we do not know what the damage will be, but it will be considerable. Even those who advocate in the party wanting a no-deal have said they accept there will be a disruption. Why would we want to put the country through that if, as Michael is saying, if we had a couple more days or weeks, we were near there with the deal, that's what he's talking about. Not an endless delay, because I appreciate your right to get on with it, but we've got to do the responsible thing to try to get a deal over the line.
You're putting your opinion ahead of the people. You basically, I know you're not directly saying it, but the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, we were promised that we were going to leave on the 29th of March. As parliamentarians are currently feeling, they feel like they are smarter than the average person.
Piers, I mean, you said the only true Brexit is a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, we're here in Thetford, and the local district here, the area, 64% voted to leave. In the recent EU election, 46% voted for Brexit Party here, which was almost more than all the other parties put together. So the message from this part of the world is very loud and clear. Get on with it and get out of the European Union. And I keep hearing people didn't know what they were voting for. You're all too stupid if you voted leave, all 17.4 million of you. Well, I remember going in and finding a ballot paper, and it didn't mention a deal. It didn't mention anything else. It just said, do you want to stay in the European Union or do you want to leave? And you ticked a box for one or the other. And it is scandalous, frankly. And I say it again as a Remainer. It is scandalous for our democracy that here we are 3 years later and we're still kicking this can down the road. No one's really got a plan of any of these leadership contenders, as far as I can see.
And
but
you're
the
not a
people
Remainer now, though, Piers, are you?
Sorry?
You're not a Remainer now.
No, I think the only way to resolve this is not more referendums and not more years agonising. Everyone is bored of this, right? They want leadership and they want decision-making. At the moment, a lot of companies are having problems through uncertainty. And this thing about it's going to be a disaster. I think we don't really know. I remember the debate over the euro in the early part of this century, when a lot of the people like Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair, Ken Clarke, Michael Heseltine were all shouting just as loudly then that if we didn't enter the euro, it would be a disaster for this country. Well, we didn't enter the euro, and it turned out to be the best thing we never did. So I take a lot of these predictions with a pinch of salt. This country, we will survive whatever happens, but let's make a decision and get on with it.
Yes, the man there in the glasses.
How many of you talk very, very well.
Oh, OK. Hang on. It was just a chap in front, actually. I'm sorry, and then I'll come to you in a minute.
He was about to have a go at me, so that's good.
Oh, I'm rather sorry I cut you off, sir. Anyway, yes.
Sorry, mate.
With Parliament still divided in the numbers as they are now, could a government survive a no-deal Brexit?
OK,
well,
let's hear from...
We'd be into general election territory, at which point I think we'd have
You'd be rather marvellous for you, Anneliese, at that point.
by Christmas, which will be even more disastrous.
Why would? I do not.
Hang on, let's... Don't shout out, we'll get the microphone over you.
So what I've been lifelong Conservative, and all we ever get is, if you don't vote for us now, you'll get Jeremy Corbyn. Well, how can it be any worse? We've got no democracy. If every MP had voted what the constituents had wanted, we would have been out 2-1. But Labour and the Conservative have got no intention of ever taking us out. So actually, I'm ashamed to have been a Conservative all my life, because I may as well have not bothered, because none of you have got the integrity to respect your things. Every Leave MP every Leave community should have been represented by a Leave MP, and if they wanted the job, they should have done it. Likewise, Remain communities, their MPs should have fought for their Remain preferences. None of you are bothered.
No, the man back there in the picture, I cut you off.
I'd like to know if the country is in such a mess. You talked about how many of you are prepared to be in a party that is prepared to prorogue Parliament? You've made such a big fuss about how important we are, it's democratic.
Well, Nicky's already said it's a mad idea.
Oh, well, has she?
Yes.
Oh, well,
Yes.
I didn't...
She did. She said it was mad.
That?
I thought you were saying Dominic Raab was mad, which was
So
highly
what about-
entertaining,
what
but she
about
wasn't.
Piers, then?
Listen, I don't think we should get to the stage of a constitutional crisis, but we are in a bit of a crisis.
But
Let's be quite clear. We're already in a crisis. This country's been paralysed for 3 years.
Well, then have an election.
We had a referendum.
Have an election.
We had
then.
a referendum. Well, wait a minute. Why should we have an election? Why should we be asked to go and vote again if this country simply refuses
Because we're
to
stuck,
enact
Piers.
the
You
result
said
of the
that we're
referendum?
paralysed. An election,
So
you will have a result.
what we need to do is actually honour the result of the referendum and leave the European Union. That's it.
The woman in the pink top. Yeah, the woman behind you. I'll come to you, sir.
You say that Michael Gove will get a deal through Parliament, but how on earth is any deal going to get through Parliament, given that we've got John Bercow as the Speaker, who at every opportunity stops everything because it's clear that he supports the remaining in the European Union?
Woman there in the dress.
Yeah, I find myself in the tricky position of agreeing with Piers, and you're an Arsenal fan, which is really bad. But I actually think the problem is Parliament itself. You have 650 MPs who had a clear mandate. I don't care how you add the figures up and how we look at them. It was Leave or Remain. Leave won, and because of personal agendas, and that's what it is, from both sides of the House, from all parties, they've got their own personal agendas as to what they want to do, and that has stopped your primary role, which is to enact the democratic will of the people. And we're just fed up, and it's undermining everything at the moment.
Totally agree.
Okay. I'm going to take another question before we end the programme tonight, which is particularly apposite today, from Gwen Porter.
Theresa May said those who served during the D-Day landings belong to the greatest generation. Will future generations be as great?
Ooh, that's food for thought, isn't it? Alison, do you want to kick us off?
I think future generations will certainly struggle to do what those people did. I mean, the stories that we've been reading over the last few days are just very humbling. And I think the stories of what the people achieved, those men achieved when they came out of the air or they arrived up on the beaches are extraordinary. But then it's when they say how terrified they were as well. And those men, they were that terrified, but they did it anyway. And I think that's very humbling when you see that, and that the sense of self-sacrifice, which is something I think perhaps we have lost now, where too often we can put ourselves before others, which was what got us through that situation then. And I think the way the Queen also has, and she too, she mentioned resilience, which is a thing that generation has. And I really hope that we can encourage and we can build that in our young people, because we're certainly going to need it in the future.
Anneliese? I mean, it begs the question, does a generation have to have been through a war to be that great?
Well, I think they certainly need to ensure that they understand and know about that conflict. And for me, it's been particularly poignant to see that, of course, so many of the people who were involved in the commemorations today and for the rest of the week, sadly, probably will not be with us in future momentous commemorations. And that means we've got to work a lot harder to make sure that everybody is aware of what they did. I mean, I was talking to my kids about it this morning, and I was saying to them what happened, how people came off those boats. They had no idea what was going to greet them, literally no idea. Some of them talking about literally, jumping into, in their words, seas filled with blood. And they did that because they knew they had to do it to liberate another country, of course.
So Gwen's question is, can future generations be as great?
Well, I think the most important thing in trying to ensure they will be is making sure that this is never forgotten. And, we're in a similar position, I would argue, actually, when it comes to some of the other horrendous events. Of course, within that war, the fact that those who survived the Holocaust are sadly dwindling in number now as well. And it is harder to convey that experience, I think, when you don't have that personal connection. So we've got to work much harder. Education is a big part of it, I think, to make sure every school is making sure that all the children understand what was done for us.
What's your view, Gwen?
I would absolutely not want to put another generation through that in order to see whether they had the strength and the mettle to be like that previous generation. But I do feel that we've lost the altruism, the sense of behaving for society, not just me. I also think that we've lost the personal dignity and discipline that previous generations have had. And I really worry and wonder whether we would get the same response from the next generation if we called them to do the same thing.
Man in the blue shirt.
I think you do our young people down in service. We've just gone through, in very recent years, fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, where young 18-year-olds were stepping up to the plate. Unlike the people in 1945, where they would have had it reported in print media, they have seen it in upfront technicolor glory, and that has had absolutely not stopped them to come forward, serve in the armed services, knowing just how many people are having their limbs blown off and their friends being killed. And much more reporting, much more awareness about the challenge that is facing them, and that did not stop them. I was very lucky to serve with some of those people, and if they can do that, and they can do that with an awareness which, knowing that you're going to step out in Sangin, and the patrol before you has been blown up, you've seen your mate come back, the new people, the new recruits are coming in, and they've seen on Facebook that this is what these people are going through, and they can do that, says there is the potential within our younger generations to step up to the plate if required. And, so that's what we should remember. They will do it if needed.
It's been incredibly moving and inspiring to hear the stories of courage and sacrifice that we've witnessed in the commemorations over the past couple of days, and I think it's been a fantastic way to remember that. We must remember that sacrifice as we go forward, but it is really important to remember that people can rise to greatness without the conflict and without war. And I'm very upbeat. One of the privileges of this job is to go around the schools in my constituency in the Highlands, and I'm very upbeat about the young people that are coming through, their commitment and dedication to their communities. And I think that we really need to create the conditions in this generation to make sure that those young people can rise as far as they can and to be as great as they possibly can. But I believe they not only have the potential to do that, but certainly from my experience, our young people have the potential to go even further in terms of their greatness.
Okay. The man then.
Yeah, hi. Apart from the age of these veterans, are they safe from prosecution?
Well, that's a whole other debate. If you'll forgive me, let's not get into that right now and in the dying minutes of the programme. The woman there in the striped T-shirt.
I'd say that part of supporting the history of our armed forces is also to support the ones that are currently serving. My brother is in the British Army. He went in at 16. He turned 18 in Afghanistan. He's still serving, and I think we need to be doing more to support the current military. We talk about PTSD. We also need to think about their living standards. And I know that my brother is serving with, when on home soil, they've got no oven, no microwave, they've got mouldy bathrooms. Let's look at the guys and girls that are currently serving for us, and let's give them the support that they need.
And for foreign and Commonwealth.
The woman there in the green top. The woman there in the green top.
I think as well that recently, with people bandying around the word fascist and Nazi and things like that as well, and taking it out of context, I think it kind of waters down as well exactly how horrific things were then. And I think that's way overused now as well. It's kind of bandied around just like a general insult, and I think people need to be mindful of that.
Well, Piers, the question is, will future generations be as great? What is your view on that?
I think absolutely they can be. I think a lot of it is down to leaders and leadership, inspiring countries. Winston Churchill did an extraordinary job in World War II, I think, in inspiring that generation to rally and defeat the Nazis. So I think leadership is, as we're seeing at the moment, this chronic lack of leadership is part of the problem in this country. I have a brother currently serving abroad as well, and he says that the new crop of young soldiers are as outstanding as any he's seen. So there's an amazing crop of very brave young men and women who are serving in the forces. But I think this thing the Queen touched on was really significant to me, resilience. Now, I'd love to take these D-Day heroes, before it's too late, take them on a tour of our schools and talk to our kids in a way that gives them proper perspective. All I keep reading about all the time, I've got 4 kids, is how this generation is so anxious about everything. They're so worried about everything. And I think, what are you really anxious about and worried about compared to that generation? You know, we seem to be going a little bit soft. And even if you say that, you get criticised by the snowflake brigade. But I think it's important to say it. I do think we need to toughen up. We need to be more mentally resilient. We need to understand perspective. You know, the planet right now is the safest it's ever been. We're living longer and we're living healthier. We're more prosperous than we've ever been. Not for everybody, but generally speaking, it's a pretty damn good time to be alive. That generation, I watched the pictures, the moving footage of these guys going off those boats into the unknown with their friends, knowing many wouldn't come back. You can't even imagine what was in their heads. And so the question is, will this generation or the next one be as great? Well, yes, but let's stop the victimhood culture. Let's stop the blame culture. Let's have some ownership of you and your life and your responsibilities. And let's just toughen up a bit as a country. And let's look at these images from D-Day. And let's remember the reason that they fought and sacrificed many of their lives was for our freedom to be as great in future generations. So let's make sure we are.
Okay. Nicky.
I think it's right that they did sacrifice their lives in many cases for our freedom. And the fact that we're having a debate like this and we're able to have free speech, going back to the protests we started the programme, is a mark of the country that they have left behind and created for us. But I was struck with your question. I mean, I hope in a way that this generation is not going to have to be as brave, because we hope we're not going to go through a conflict like that again, because we talked about serving soldiers, but of course many, many civilians. I think that's what's been revealing about the D-Day, was how many French civilians were killed in Normandy and caught up in the battle. But as a former education secretary, I had the privilege of going around many schools. We're sitting in a school tonight, and actually I think we've got some remarkable young people in this country who are fantastic. And the other thing that struck me recently was listening to the inquest into the London Bridge stabbings, was how brave people were in terms of taking on our police forces who do every day go into danger. People are like our paramedics and others. I absolutely think that if it was needed, yes, we would step up to the plate and future generations would be as brave, but I suspect they'll end up being tested maybe in a completely different way, sadly.
Well, with that, we are out of time. How lovely to end on a subject like that, and with the greatest respect, not on Brexit and other things, but just to reflect for a moment on what have been such intensely moving images today. I'm really glad we had time for that question. Our next programme is in Brecon, and the following week we will be in Tottenham. So you probably know the number by now. Call 0330 123 9988. Tottenham in North London.
God, I swerved that one.
Yeah, we might think...
Don't rise to it.
No. Thank God we swerved you on that was what I was thinking. Anyway, if you'd like to be in the audience, that's the number to call, or you can go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. And if you want to have your say on tonight's topics, as always, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live right now. But for now, thank you very much to my panel, to all of you for coming here this evening, and of course to you at home for watching and listening from Thetford. Bye-bye.